I let my daughter's friend stay in the guest room, and now I can't sleep. What happened that night, CH? Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from, and what's your first thought about this story? It started as a simple favor. My daughter, always conscientious and slightly anxious when it came to friends, asked if her friend Emma could stay in the guest room after a late evening out. Nothing unusual, I told myself, just a girl I barely knew coming under my roof for the night. And yet, the moment I stepped into the softly lit living room to prepare the room, a curious tension settled in, a quiet awareness I didn't expect. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd placed in the dresser drawers. The linens were crisp, the pillows plump just enough to feel inviting without being extravagant. I left the window slightly ajar, letting a whisper of the night breeze in, carrying with it the subtle sweetness of spring flowers from the garden. Every detail was meant to make a guest comfortable. Yet, for some reason, my focus wasn't on the room at all. I heard her before I saw her, the light hum of her voice drifting from the hallway, the way her shoes clicked gently against the polished wood floors. She was unpacking quietly, each motion deliberate but unself-conscious. There was a softness in the way she arranged her belongings, a small meticulousness that caught me off guard. And then, just for a second, our eyes met in the doorway, and I noticed something in her gaze, a mixture of curiosity and slight nervousness, like she was testing the waters of unfamiliar territory. My pulse, absurdly, betrayed me. I reminded myself to keep my distance. She was young, full of life, laughter, and the kind of energy that made the air feel warmer simply because it existed. I found myself watching, quietly, appreciating the little things, the way her hair fell in gentle waves across her shoulders, how she smiled at the sunlight filtering through the blinds, the faint brush of her fingertips against the edge of the dresser as she settled in. All innocent, all natural. But the human mind, it seems, has a way of noticing subtleties that feel like much more. There was a protective instinct in me, too. A desire to make sure she was comfortable, safe, happy in a place that was not her own. And yet, beneath it, a whisper of something unfamiliar, an awareness of her presence that lingered after she left the room, an echo of warmth and vitality that seemed to hang in the air. It was unsettling and yet quietly compelling. By the time I stepped back to turn off the bedside lamp, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in any inappropriate way, I told myself firmly, but in that way one notices a spark in another person, fleeting, delicate, and confusingly profound. A simple favor, a guest room, a night of lodging, had become something quietly charged, the air between us heavier than it should be, carrying unspoken tension I didn't yet understand. And so, as I closed the door behind her, leaving her to the gentle hum of the night, I felt a restlessness I hadn't expected. Sleep would not come easily tonight. A subtle curiosity had taken root, one that promised to grow in ways I was both eager and afraid to acknowledge. Morning arrived soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the blinds and casting striped patterns across the kitchen floor. I had woken early, as I often do, to the quiet of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional bird calling from the garden. I thought I'd have a peaceful hour to myself before the day truly began. But then I heard her, the light shuffle of feet across the hall, the gentle creak of the guest room door. Emma emerged, wrapped in a loosely tied robe, hair still damp from a hastily taken shower. She moved with that effortless combination of youth and grace that makes every small action seem significant. She hummed softly, a tune I didn't recognize, and my gaze caught her for the briefest moment, her fingers brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, a smile playing at the corner of her lips as she surveyed the kitchen. It was innocent, entirely natural, and yet something about it tightened the chest in a way I hadn't anticipated. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the rich aroma fill the air between us, careful to act as if nothing unusual had occurred. And yet, every glance she cast in my direction seemed to linger just a second too long. She moved closer to the counter, reaching for a bowl of fruit, and our hands brushed, not intentionally, but deliberately enough that a shiver ran up my spine. The warmth of her skin lingered against mine, fleeting but potent. I reminded myself, sharply, to keep composed. She was 24, full of life, and I had a responsibility, not an invitation, for anything beyond kindness and civility. We exchanged casual words, laughter spilling lightly over mundane things, the breakfast, the weather, the small domestic rituals of a morning shared. But the tension threaded itself through the space between us, subtle and electric. I noticed the tilt of her head as she spoke, the softness in her voice, and the way her eyes would meet mine before darting away. Each small gesture was magnified in my mind, a laugh that lingered, a hand adjusting a sleeve, the slight brush against the counter when she passed by. There was a strange duality in my attention, protective and admiring, distant yet drawn. Every instinct to act responsibly was shadowed by a more primal, unbidden awareness of her presence. I felt my chest tighten when she leaned slightly closer, the warmth of the morning sun on her skin illuminating the gentle contours of her face. And yet I held my composure, aware of the ethical boundary I could not cross. Coffee forgotten, I found myself watching, listening, attuned to her every movement. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair in gold, the faint scent of her shampoo carried through the air, and I realized that my fascination wasn't something I could easily dismiss. It was quiet, simmering, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. By the time she left the kitchen to fetch a plate for breakfast, I felt a strange ache of longing, tempered by resolve. Curiosity had grown into tension, attraction whispered but never spoken, and the air between us vibrated with possibility. And in that simple, sunlit kitchen, I understood that this night's guest was no ordinary visitor. She had already unsettled the careful rhythms of my life. The afternoon settled in with a quiet hum, sunlight softened by drifting clouds, painting the living room in muted golds and grays. I found myself alone for a moment, yet not really alone. The memory of her presence lingered like the faint perfume she had brought with her into the house. Emma had moved about the space with an effortless grace, curling up on the sofa with a book, completely unaware of the weight of my gaze. I sipped a lukewarm cup of tea, listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood, the low murmur of traffic, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the subtle creak of the floorboards as the house settled. And yet, the house felt smaller somehow, charged with the echo of her movements. Every glance she cast my way, every gentle laugh, seemed amplified in my mind. I realized that my fascination with her was no longer fleeting. It was quietly persistent, threading through my thoughts despite my best efforts to remain detached. There was a battle raging within me, subtle but relentless. Part of me wanted nothing more than to maintain the decorum of my role, the responsible adult, the guardian figure. Emma was my daughter's friend, a young woman with all the vitality and curiosity of someone just beginning to explore the world. To act on anything beyond kindness would be a breach of trust, a moral misstep I could not allow. Yet another part of me, the part one didn't fully understand, was drawn to her in ways I hadn't anticipated. I caught myself imagining small, impossible scenarios, sitting closer on the sofa, hearing her laugh in a softer, more private way, the brush of her hand against mine lingering just a second longer. Each fleeting fantasy was immediately followed by a pang of guilt. I was 20 years her senior, a man whose life was marked by experience, restraint, and hard-earned caution. And here she was, youthful, open, unknowingly challenging every carefully constructed boundary I had set for myself. The more I tried to focus on mundane tasks, straightening a cushion, reading a letter, attending to the garden outside, the more my mind returned to her. Her voice hummed in memory, her movements played back like a film I could not pause. The ethical clarity I prided myself on began to blur under the weight of my own fascination. I knew I could not act on it. I would not act on it. And yet, the tension, subtle and intoxicating, was impossible to ignore. A small, almost imperceptible moment, the brush of her fingers against the edge of a blanket as she stretched, was enough to make my chest tighten. The awareness of her presence, the warmth of the air she displaced, the soft rise and fall of her breathing when she read quietly nearby, all seemed magnified, almost painfully so. I realized that desire and responsibility could coexist, uneasy and fragile, without crossing boundaries. And in that realization, a strange, almost painful respect for myself and for her emerged. I could feel deeply without violating trust. As the light shifted toward evening, I settled into the quiet rhythm of observation and reflection. Internal conflict simmered beneath the surface, unspoken but vivid, a tension between longing and ethics, curiosity and restraint. Emma had become more than a guest. She was a mirror reflecting desires I had long kept hidden, a catalyst for attention that would quietly shape the days to come. The evening had settled into a quiet intimacy that only happens when the world outside seems distant and irrelevant. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of amber and rose across the sky. I stepped onto the porch to enjoy the warm breeze, hoping for a moment of solitude, and found Emma already there, perched lightly on the railing. Her hair caught the fading light, glowing in reddish-gold hues, and she glanced at me with that curious smile that seemed to carry both mischief and thoughtfulness. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. I gestured to the swing at the corner of the porch, and she eased onto it, folding her legs beneath her. The gentle sway of the wooden seat, the whisper of the breeze through the trees, and the distant hum of the neighborhood created a bubble of privacy, a space removed from the usual rules and routines. Our conversation began casually, books we had read, movies we liked, but gradually shifted, almost imperceptibly, into deeper territory. Emma's tone softened, her voice lowering as if testing the safety of the space. She spoke of her insecurities, her dreams, the quiet fears that she usually kept tucked away from the world. I listened, leaning slightly forward, letting her words settle over me like a warm, insistent presence. For the first time that evening, I spoke not as a guardian or authority figure, but as a man willing to let a fragment of himself be seen. I told her of my own regrets, moments of hesitation, and choices I had once feared to make. My words were careful, deliberate, but laden with honesty. She tilted her head, listening intently, eyes wide, absorbing each syllable. There was a trust in her gaze that pulled at something deep inside me, an acknowledgement that in this suspended moment, we were equals in vulnerability. A quiet pause followed, and our proximity became more noticeable. She reached instinctively for her mug of tea, and our hands brushed. The contact was fleeting, yet it carried weight, a reminder of the delicate tension threading between us. I resisted the urge to linger, reminding myself that gestures of care could convey intimacy without crossing lines. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her laughter when she spoke again, made the air feel charged, electric yet serene. The swing creaked softly as we moved together in silence, the gentle rhythm echoing our shared heartbeat of unspoken understanding. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the glimmer of the porch light in her eyes, the way she exhaled slowly when I recounted a story from my past. It was a moment suspended in time, emotionally potent, ethically sound, and charged with an intimacy that could have easily tipped into something forbidden if not tempered with care. By the time we stepped inside, both of us carried a quiet satisfaction, a sense of connection that transcended mere conversation. Our bond had deepened without force or haste, through trust, openness, and the electric tension of shared vulnerability. That evening, I realized that desire did not always need to be acted upon. Sometimes, it was enough to simply feel, fully and responsibly, the pull of another soul. Night had wrapped the house in quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every memory. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floors, and the faint rustle of leaves outside created a backdrop that seemed almost conspiratorial, inviting me to confront truths I had carefully tucked away. I sat alone in the study, a cup of tea cooling in my hand, my gaze wandering to the empty guest room door. Emma was asleep, unaware of the turmoil she had stirred in a man who had prided himself on restraint and clarity. I could no longer deny it. The attraction I had felt since the moment she arrived was undeniable. Soft, subtle, but persistent. Her presence lingered in my thoughts like a melody I couldn't stop humming. It wasn't lust in the crass sense, nor was it a fleeting curiosity. It was a deep, human recognition of vitality and beauty that contrasted sharply with the years I had lived and the caution I had cultivated. I felt it in the quickening of my pulse at her laughter, in the warmth that lingered on my skin after our hands had brushed, and in the ache of missing her before she was even gone. Yet alongside that acknowledgement came clarity. She was my daughter's friend, a young woman whose trust and innocence I was charged to protect. Any impulsive desire, any indulgence in the fantasies that teased at the edges of my mind, would be a betrayal of that trust. The tension between longing and responsibility was sharp, almost painful, but necessary. I realized that desire need not always be acted upon to be valid, that the human heart could feel profoundly without transgressing boundaries. I found myself replaying small moments of the day, her glance over the counter in the morning, the way she had hummed while unpacking, the delicate pause in her voice when she confided something personal on the porch. Each memory was imbued with warmth, curiosity, and a kind of innocent electricity. And each was tempered by the moral compass I refused to compromise. I understood that my fascination was as much about admiration, respect, and the deep bond forming between us as it was about any attraction. The house was dark now, shadows stretching across the walls, and I took a slow, deliberate sip of tea, letting the heat settle in my chest. I realized that this internal struggle, between desire and responsibility, curiosity and restraint, was teaching me something essential. I could feel deeply, with intensity and honesty, without harming her or overstepping the lines that separated care from obsession. There was a profound satisfaction in that understanding, a quiet triumph of self-discipline and ethical awareness. As I finally set the empty cup aside, I felt a strange lightness. The tension remained, yes, but it was no longer a source of guilt or confusion. It had become a quiet reminder of human complexity, of the ways connection can be electric yet safe, intimate yet respectful. Emma had awakened something in me, and in doing so, had illuminated the line between desire and duty, teaching me that sometimes the most profound emotions are those held quietly, nurtured internally, and expressed through trust, care, and presence rather than action. And as the house settled into complete silence, I allowed myself to breathe, fully aware of the pull of another soul, and fully committed to honoring it with integrity. Morning light spilled softly through the kitchen window, painting everything in a warm, golden hue. The house was quiet, save for the faint hiss of the coffee machine and the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Emma emerged from the guest room, her robe loosely tied, hair still slightly damp, and a serene expression that somehow made the ordinary morning feel extraordinary. She greeted me with a gentle smile, and for a moment, I caught myself lingering on the curve of her lips, the warmth of her gaze, the ease with which she occupied the space. I poured her a cup of coffee and handed it across the counter. Our fingers brushed briefly, accidental yet deliberate enough to send a familiar shiver up my spine. I forced myself to meet her eyes and smile, masking the tension that hummed beneath the surface. She accepted the cup, a soft, "thank you," leaving her lips, accompanied by that quiet sparkle of acknowledgement that always seemed to linger just beyond words. The connection between us, delicate yet undeniable, hung in the air like sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. We moved about the kitchen in a comfortable rhythm, speaking in muted tones, punctuated by laughter at mundane observations, the slight bitterness of the coffee, a spill of cereal, a memory recalled from some trivial event. And yet, every movement, every glance carried weight. The warmth of her presence brushed against the edges of my consciousness, reminding me that intimacy isn't always spoken aloud. Sometimes, it exists in quiet gestures, in shared smiles, in the comfort of someone's nearness. I noticed the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the way her shoulders relaxed when she leaned slightly closer, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled. Each small detail grounded me in the moment, making the world outside fade to insignificance. And in that fading, a profound understanding settled in. This quiet connection, this shared space of trust and mutual awareness, was enough. Desire didn't need to be acted upon to be real. Admiration and affection could exist fully within the boundaries of respect. The morning unfolded gently, filled with small acts of care, handing her a napkin when she spilled a drop of coffee, sharing a warm smile across the counter, listening attentively when she recounted her plans for the day. Each gesture was subtle, YouTube safe, yet charged with the intimacy of human attention. I felt a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. The knowledge that we could feel deeply for one another without crossing lines, that emotional closeness could be more powerful than anything physical. When she finally prepared to leave the kitchen, coffee in hand, I lingered a moment longer at the counter, letting the warmth of her presence settle around me like a quiet embrace. Our eyes met, and for an instant, the tension, the longing, the unspoken attraction, all of it, was acknowledged and shared without a word. As she moved to leave the house, I realized that this morning, this connection, this small and perfect intimacy, was enough. Emma had become more than a guest. She had become a presence that had shifted my perspective, taught me patience, and allowed me to experience desire tempered by care. And in that realization, I felt a quiet contentment, a connection fully realized, ethically sound, and emotionally profound. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the yard, turning ordinary shapes, trees, fences, the swing, into something almost ethereal. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the garden, and I found myself sitting on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly beneath me as I tried to gather my thoughts. Today had been filled with moments that lingered, invisible threads tying me to a presence I would soon have to release. Emma had spent the last few hours quietly packing her things, her laughter occasionally drifting from the guest room, soft and musical, reminding me of the ease with which she had filled the house with life. She moved with the same natural grace I had noticed the moment she arrived, her hair catching the last rays of sun as she stepped toward the door. Watching her, I felt a strange mixture of pride, longing, and acceptance, the awareness that this connection, profound as it had become, had its limits. She paused at the doorway, turning to offer me a small, genuine smile. In that instant, words felt unnecessary. The warmth of her gaze, the light of understanding in her eyes spoke volumes. We had shared something rare and delicate, a bond that had grown from simple kindness into quiet intimacy, threaded with unspoken attraction and mutual respect. Yet, as much as the tension had been a part of our days, the ethical boundaries we honored were just as powerful, shaping the space in which that intimacy could safely exist. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying that familiar lilt of curiosity and sincerity. "For everything." The words were simple, but the meaning was deeper than she might have known. I nodded, feeling the weight of all the small moments between us, the shared laughter, the brushed hands, the confidences whispered on the porch swing, settle into a quiet, enduring memory. I stepped closer to see her off, careful to maintain the proper distance, but instinctively wanting to let her know that her presence had mattered more than she could imagine. Our hands brushed lightly in a socially acceptable farewell, lingering just enough to carry the weight of all unspoken acknowledgement. There was no rush, no awkwardness, only the mutual understanding that something significant had occurred, even if it had been confined to small gestures, shared smiles, and quiet proximity. As the front door closed behind her, I remained on the porch swing, letting the silence settle around me. The air felt different now, not heavy with tension, but rich with reflection and contentment. I understood that some connections are not meant to be acted upon in the physical sense to be fully meaningful. Emma had awakened in me a capacity for careful desire, for admiration tempered with respect, and for intimacy that thrives on presence rather than possession. The evening deepened, shadows stretching across the yard, and I exhaled slowly, feeling a rare peace. This experience, fleeting yet profound, had shifted something within me. I had glimpsed the delicate interplay of desire and restraint, admiration and ethical care, and found that even in letting someone go, the connection could remain, treasured and untainted. And so I sat there, the swing moving gently beneath me, letting the memory of her presence linger like a soft, golden light, an invisible warmth that would remain long after she had left, teaching me that the most powerful bonds are sometimes those that exist quietly, ethically, and fully in the heart. If this story made your heart race or left you thinking about the tension and connection, hit that like button. Subscribe for more slow burn, age gap romance stories, and comment below, where are you watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you the most? And everything.